My fiancée looked me straight in the eye and said we needed to cancel the honeymoon because her ex needed her that week. I looked back at her and said, "That's fine. There is no honeymoon, there is no wedding, and there is no us. My name is Ryan. I am 33 years old, and I work as a structural engineer for a construction firm in Ohio. My life has always run on logic. I check numbers twice before I trust them. I build things that cannot afford to fail because if a beam is wrong, people get hurt. Maybe that is why I never rush decisions about people either. I like to watch, to listen, and to give things time before I commit. When I met Megan 3 years ago at a mutual friend's barbecue, she was the opposite of me in almost every way. She was loud in a good way, the kind of person who could walk into a room and make strangers laugh within 5 minutes. I was quiet, careful, maybe even boring by her standards, but somehow we fit. She used to say I was her calm and she was my color. For 2 years, that balance felt real. We moved in together, we adopted a dog, we built a life that looked, from the outside, like something people write about with envy. Then came the engagement, and with it came Chris. Chris was Megan's ex-boyfriend from college. They had dated for almost 3 years before Megan and I met, and according to her, the breakup was messy but necessary. She always described him as someone who never grew up, someone who needed constant emotional babysitting. She said their story was over romantically, but she still felt responsible for him, like an older sister who couldn't just walk away. In the beginning, I didn't think much of it. People stay friends with their exes all the time. But slowly, the friendship started taking up more space than I expected. Late-night phone calls that lasted an hour. Messages that she would quickly put face down on the table when I walked into the room. Small things, but the kind of small things that build a pattern if you pay attention long enough. I brought it up gently the first time, not as an accusation, just as a question. I asked her why Chris needed to call her at 11 at night instead of during the day like a normal friend would. She told me I was overthinking it, that Chris was going through a rough patch after his own breakup, and that she was simply being kind. I wanted to believe her, so I let it go. But something in my chest didn't fully settle, the way you feel when a bridge looks fine but the sound underneath it is just slightly off. Wedding planning started about 10 months before the actual date, and that is when things began shifting in a way I could no longer ignore. Megan handled the guest list, the venue walkthroughs, and the vendor calls while I focused on the budget and logistics, which suited my brain perfectly. We were a good team on paper, but every few weeks, Chris's name would slip into conversation in a way that felt too casual to be accidental. She would mention that he was struggling to find a job, or that he had been feeling lonely since his last relationship ended, or that he had texted her something concerning late at night. Each time, I reminded her calmly that I was okay with basic friendliness, but not okay with her becoming his emotional lifeline. She always agreed in the moment and always drifted back to old patterns a few weeks later. The first real crack happened on a regular Thursday evening. I came home early from a site inspection and found her sitting on the kitchen floor, phone against her ear, voice soft in a way she rarely used with me anymore. When she saw me, she stood up fast and ended the call almost mid-sentence. I asked who it was, even though I already knew. She said it was Chris, and that he had been crying about his dad's health issues, and that she just wanted to be there for him. I asked why she needed to sit on the floor to comfort a friend. She snapped at me, saying I was turning something innocent into something suspicious, and that if I couldn't trust her, maybe the problem was me, not her friendship. That night, we had our first real argument about boundaries. I told her clearly that I didn't want secrecy in our relationship, that hiding a phone or lowering her voice when I walked in was not something friends do. It was something people do when they know a line is being crossed. She cried, apologized, and promised things would change. For a while, they seemed to. The calls became less frequent, or at least less obvious. I convinced myself we had moved past it. Deposits for the venue were already paid. The dress was ordered. Invitations were sent to nearly 140 guests. We were financially and emotionally locked into this wedding, and I didn't want to blow up something over a feeling I couldn't fully prove. Looking back now, that hesitation is exactly what let the next 3 months unfold the way they did. Slowly, quietly, until the moment there was no more room to pretend I hadn't seen it coming. 3 weeks before the wedding, Megan told me Chris had gone through another breakup, this time with someone he had dated for almost a year. According to her, he was completely wrecked, barely eating, barely sleeping, and reaching out to her constantly because she was, in her words, the only person who truly understood him. I listened without much reaction, mostly because I had learned that reacting only led to longer arguments that went nowhere. What I didn't expect was what came next. We were sitting at our dining table one Sunday afternoon, finalizing the last details of our honeymoon in the Caribbean. Flights booked, hotel paid in full, everything locked in for the week right after the wedding. Megan set her laptop down, took a breath, and told me she needed to talk about something important. Her tone was strangely calm, almost rehearsed, the kind of calm people use when they already know you're not going to like what comes next. She said Chris had asked her to be physically present with him for a few days because he felt like he was falling apart and didn't trust himself to be alone. I asked what that meant exactly. She said it meant staying with him for part of our honeymoon week and that we could always reschedule the trip for later. I sat there for a moment, waiting for her to say she was joking, but her face stayed completely serious. Then she said the sentence that changed everything for me. She said, "He needs me that week. The honeymoon can wait. We have our whole lives ahead of us." In that moment, something inside me went very quiet, not angry in a loud way, just still, the way a room goes silent right before something breaks. I realized she had just ranked her priorities out loud, without even noticing she had done it, and I was not at the top of that list. I didn't argue with her that night. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply nodded and told her I understood. She seemed relieved, thinking the conversation was over and that I had accepted it. What she didn't know was that I had already started making decisions in my head, decisions I would act on the very next morning, decisions that would end everything we had built in the span of a few hours, calmly, methodically, without a single raised voice. The next morning, I woke up at my usual time, made coffee, and sat down with my laptop while Megan was still asleep. I didn't feel rage, I felt clarity, the kind of clarity that only comes once you finally stop making excuses for someone. I called the venue first and canceled our reservation, accepting the loss of our deposit without hesitation. Then I canceled the catering, the photographer, and finally the honeymoon package, losing thousands of dollars in the process, money that suddenly felt meaningless compared to what I was protecting. By the time Megan woke up around 9, everything was already done. She walked into the kitchen, still half asleep, and picked up exactly where she left off the night before, telling me she had been thinking, and that we really did need to push the honeymoon back because Chris needed her. I let her finish speaking completely before I responded. Then I told her, calmly, that the honeymoon was already canceled, along with the venue, the caterer, and the wedding itself. She blinked at me like she hadn't understood the words. I repeated it slower. There is no wedding to reschedule because there is no wedding anymore. Her face shifted from confusion to disbelief, then to anger within seconds. She accused me of overreacting, of punishing her for having compassion, of being controlling and cold. I told her I had given her months of warnings about this exact pattern, and that this wasn't about 1 week, it was about a year of watching myself slowly become optional in my own relationship. She tried a new approach, saying she would cut Chris off completely if that's what it took to fix things. I asked her one simple question, the same question I had been avoiding for weeks. I asked, if I hadn't canceled everything this morning, would you have still gone to him that week? She paused. It wasn't a long pause, maybe 3 seconds, but it told me everything. She finally admitted yes because he asked first, and because she genuinely believed I would never actually leave over it. That was the moment I took off the engagement ring from where it sat on the counter and told her it was over. Not out of anger, but out of certainty. I told her I would help sort out the lease, split our shared belongings fairly, and cover moving costs if it made the separation faster and cleaner. She called me heartless. I told her I simply refused to spend my life negotiating for a place in someone's priorities. I moved out within a week. Packing up 3 years of shared life is strange. You realize how much of your identity gets tangled into furniture, photos, and small routines you never noticed you built together. I handled it the same way I handle everything, methodically, without drama, documenting what belonged to who so there would be no arguments later. Megan tried calling several times that first week. I didn't answer. Eventually she switched to texting, then to email once I blocked her number completely. Her messages went through phases, first anger, accusing me of humiliating her in front of family and friends by canceling everything so suddenly. Then guilt, telling me people were asking her uncomfortable questions she didn't know how to answer. Then something softer, claiming that the situation with Chris had clarified things for her, and that she realized she wanted a future with me, not him. I read every message, but I didn't respond to most of them. What stung the most wasn't the anger. It was learning through mutual friends a few weeks later that Megan had, in fact, spent part of what would have been our honeymoon week at Chris's apartment anyway, helping him cook, sitting with him through his worst nights, playing exactly the role she had described to me before everything fell apart. When I heard that, I didn't feel jealousy. Strangely enough, I felt confirmed. If she had truly believed our relationship was worth saving, she would have created distance immediately instead of stepping fully into that role the moment the pressure was gone. Our mutual friends split into camps, some quietly siding with her, calling me cold and impulsive, others reaching out privately to tell me they understood completely once they heard the full timeline. I stopped trying to manage the narrative. The facts were simple enough on their own. She chose to comfort someone from her past during the 1 week meant to celebrate our future. And when I asked directly, she admitted she would have gone regardless of my feelings. About 6 weeks after everything ended, I ran into her at a mutual friend's engagement party. I almost didn't go, but avoiding every shared space forever felt exhausting and unnecessary. She looked composed from a distance, confident even, like nothing had happened. Eventually she approached me directly, asking if we could talk outside for a few minutes, just to clear the air between us one final time. Outside, in the quiet parking lot, Megan told me she had been doing a lot of thinking since everything ended. She mentioned that Chris had already moved on and started seeing someone new, and there was a strange edge in her voice when she said it, almost like disappointment that her sacrifice hadn't meant more to him in the end. She told me she had expected me to fight harder for her, to argue, to chase her down and prove I wanted this badly enough. She said real love means pushing through someone's worst moments, not walking away from them. I told her, as calmly as I could, that I never left because she cared about someone going through pain. I left because she made it clear, in her own words, that I was negotiable, that my place in her life could be rearranged whenever someone else's crisis felt more urgent. She asked if there was any version of events where I would consider giving us another chance. I thought about it honestly for a moment before answering, and told her no, not because I hated her, but because once you see exactly how someone ranks their priorities under real pressure, you don't get to unknow it. She looked frustrated, but not entirely surprised. We walked back inside separately, and that was the last real conversation we ever had. It has been almost a year now since that Sunday morning when I canceled the wedding, the honeymoon, and the relationship in the span of a single conversation. Financially, I lost money on deposits and travel bookings that I never got back. Socially, I had to explain to extended family why invitations were suddenly meaningless. None of it was comfortable, but all of it was manageable because money and awkward conversations fade with time. What stayed with me longer was the realization that loyalty without boundaries isn't love. It's just fear of disappointing everyone except the person who actually deserves your loyalty the most. I don't think Megan was a villain in some dramatic sense. I think she genuinely believed that being needed by everyone was proof of how good she was as a person. The problem is, you cannot be someone's whole world and everyone else's emergency contact at the same time. Someone always ends up second, and I decided I refused to spend my life being that someone. So here is the question I still think about sometimes, and maybe you have an answer I don't. Was I wrong to end an entire future over one sentence? Or was that sentence simply the truth finally showing itself out loud? I genuinely like to know what you would have done in my place.